Hi, everyone, and welcome to Lobbying 101. This is Cathy Atkins, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director of CAMFT, and I'll be talking today about grassroots advocacy in Washington, D.C. I also have David Connolly, our federal lobbyist, on the webinar as well. David, if you want to say hello.
Yeah, hi, everybody. Good to be with you.
Okay, so to get started, here we go. So what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about the legislative process in lobbying, the issues that we'll be advocating, what does the day generally look like, logistics such as travel, food, and attire, what kind of homework do you have prior to lobby day, and what kind of things we'll be looking to you for after the lobby day. So here I have a sort of markup of what, when a bill goes through Congress and ends up getting signed by the president, sort of what it looks like going through both sides, both houses of the federal legislature.
In the federal legislature, unlike the California legislature, there are thousands and thousands of bills that are introduced during each Congress. Now, when we say Congress, we mean 2-year sessions. So in other words, there's the first session, which consists of 1 year, and then there's the second session that also consists of 1 year. And we call that a Congress. The bills get introduced, and then on the House side, the Speaker of the House then determines which committee of jurisdiction will the bill be considered by. For example, in Medicare, in the House of Representatives, there are 2 committees that have jurisdiction over Medicare-related bills, the Energy and Commerce Committee and the Ways and Means Committee. On a veterans issue, it would only be the Veterans Committee. So once the committee has the bill referred to it, it makes a decision as to whether or not it is going to have a hearing on the bill. Although that is not necessary, it usually precedes the bill being considered by the committee line by line, or as we call it, markup. But it's not necessary to have a hearing before you proceed to markup. So it's entirely possible that a bill can be introduced and go directly to markup. And this happens oftentimes when a bill has been introduced in a number of Congresses, and the committees are familiar with the underlying subject matter of that bill. Now, during this markup process in the committee, they literally go through almost every line of the committee, of the bill, and each committee member is entitled to offer an amendment to that particular line or that particular section of the bill. And if they do, they get a chance to explain their amendment, and then there is a vote on it. Once the process has been completed of reviewing the bill line by line, there then is going to be a vote on the bill itself by the members of the committee. If that bill gets a majority vote of the committee members, then it is going to be reported to the full House of Representatives. And the other interesting part of this process is that if that majority vote is obtained, there is a report that is also issued describing the particular bill to the other members of the House of Representatives who are not on the Committee of Jurisdiction and therefore have not been part of this review process line by line. This becomes important because the report can be used after the bill becomes law to interpret it and to draft regulations under it. After the bill is reported by the committee, the Speaker of the House, if he or she so chooses, can schedule a vote on that bill by the full body. It then comes to the floor under a particular ground rule which sets the parameters for the time that the chamber will consider the bill and the amendments that will be in order to the bill once this debate and discussion moves forward on the full floor of the House. After the allotted time, the bill is then considered by the full House of Representatives, and if it receives a majority vote, then it passes the House of Representatives, and it will be sent over to the Senate for its consideration. Now, the process that I described for the House of Representatives, from the introduction of the bill to the vote on the floor, is very similar in the Senate. Except that instead of the Speaker of the House referring a bill to a particular committee, it is the parliamentarian of the Senate who refers that particular bill to a committee. But the process, as I described in the House, of hearing, markup, full consideration by the body is very, very similar to the House. If the House and the Senate pass a bill which is not perfectly correct and exact in every word, then there has to be a conference between the House and the Senate to work out the differences in the bills. And once this conference, and it's referred to a committee of members from both the House of Representatives and the Senate, once this committee of House members and senators agree upon a uniform text, it goes back to the floor of the respective chambers for a vote. But this time, there are no amendments allowed. It's an up or down vote by each chamber for passage of the bill. If both chambers, the House and the Senate, pass the bill, then it gets sent to the president for his or her approval. If the president signs the bill, it becomes law. If the president vetoes the bill, declines to sign it, it gets sent back to the House and the Senate, and then each body has an opportunity to pass it again. But to pass it over the president's veto or objections, it has to get a 2/3 vote of those members present and voting on the chamber floor when it is considered. If this 2/3 vote is achieved, then the bill becomes law over the president's objections. Oftentimes, however, what happens is that one of the chambers will pass a bill. Say, for instance, in our example, the House of Representatives would pass a bill first and send it over to the Senate. The Senate might not bother with going through the process of referring it to a particular committee. It might simply bring the bill up for a vote on the Senate floor. And in practical matters, that's how most legislation is passed through the Congress. It is when one particular body accepts verbatim the version of the bill passed by the other body. So in brief, that's how a bill becomes law.
All right, David, thank you. So next we're going to kind of talk about generally lobbying and what it means. I think there's, a lot of people tie a negative connotation to the word lobbying and what it means and what it actually is. And truthfully, before working at CAMFT, I sort of had that negative connotation as well. But what I've learned is that, people who are elected officials, be it Congress people or senators, they can't be experts in everything. They can't be experts in healthcare and freeways and environment and tax law. And so they have not only staff that works with them, but people who are educated on the policy side, meaning nonprofits such as CAMFT or teachers unions or pharmaceutical companies, and some lobby groups you might have, you may not like, and some you may like, but that is how you educate the legislature and the legislators within to understand the nuances of the policy behind certain laws. David, did you want to review sort of what lobbying is, how it's done, why it's important to be a constituent, and why nonprofits such as CAMFT are important to the lobbying efforts?
Yes, but I'd like to just re-echo a point that Cathy made, and it's a very good one. And that is there are so many complicated issues that come before the Congress. The role of lobbyists really is to provide information to the members of the House and the senators so they can better understand, as Cathy said, the nuances of the particular legislation. So it's a really very important function that lobbyists to the Congress provide. So how is it done? Well, as you'll hear said over many instances, again, because of the complexity of the variety of legislation that passes in both houses of Congress, the members and the senators have to rely upon their staff to give them more insight, more information on the particular pieces of legislation. So lobbying, for the most part, consists of contacting the staff of the member or the senator and trying to set up meetings with them where you can explain to them the factual background for the need or the objection to a particular piece of legislation. And knowing exactly how a particular proposed piece of legislation is going to affect the legislator's district in terms of the House of Representatives or the state in terms of the senators is a key part of not only lobbying, but why there should be lobbying. Because what may be good for the state of Oklahoma may not be good for the state of California. And legislators need to know what the effect of the legislation is going to be on their home districts or states. And let's also digress for a second and remember that the first job of a member of the House of Representatives or the senator is to get elected. They must be elected before they can become members of the legislature. So there is where you as constituents come in. You are the people who elect the members of Congress to their positions. And it's not only you, but it's also your interaction with your family members, with your colleagues at work, with your friends who give an indication as to the desirability or the undesirability of electing a particular piece of legislation or legislator to pass upon that legislation. So please do not sell yourself short when it comes to your role in this process, because as a constituent, as a voter, you have a key role in not only imparting information to that legislator, but actually putting the particular legislator in the Congress. Now, in terms of CAMFT being a nonprofit, I like to say that it is really a pleasure to be associated with an organization like CAMFT because they're a white hat group. They are a group of people who are advocating for other people and for those folks to have a better and a happier life in the country. So what you go to advocate on in Washington are legislation that will make people's lives better. And I think that's in a much better position to be in than, quite frankly, if you were lobbying on tobacco or even something as controversial as gun control.
Thank you, David. Okay. And, quickly, actually, before I move on, and I just wanted to thank David for not only going through this with us today, but just to say for those of you who will be lobbying, David's job there is to make everything easier for us, and he really knows not just the players, but the topic and the issues and the ins and outs. And so you'll all have a chance to meet David when we're in Washington, D.C. So David, again, thank you.
You're welcome.
So what we'll be talking about there is Medicare. Some years we last minute add on an additional topic depending on what's going on, but that's rare. It's generally discussing Medicare and MFTs being added to the list of providers who can be reimbursed for Medicare. So just as background, Medicare recipients are those that are 65 or older, and those with certain disabilities. And what our goal is to get our bill, so the CAMFT coalition bill, adding LMFTs and actually LPCCs to Medicare, to get that smaller bill into a bigger bill. As a history, we have had bills in the Senate and Congress for many years going now, and it does take a while to be added to federal bills. As David mentioned earlier, in California, you have a lot of little issues that become law, whereas on the federal level, you have concepts and you have small ideas that get added into a bigger package. And the interesting part of this is that sometimes your little bill, which is, often non-controversial or generally accepted, will be added to a bill that becomes controversial and therefore doesn't move. We've seen that both in the House and the Senate with our bill being attached to a controversial bill. Generally speaking, there's no one opposed to our bills. Again, we have one in the Senate and one in the House. It's bipartisan. Meaning both, it has both Republicans and Democrats supporting it. The goal, like I said, at this point is to get it tied to a bigger bill. Now, some of the issues that have come to date that make it harder to get co-sponsors, and let me step aside for a second. The goal, as David sort of hinted to, was we want to get as many co-sponsors as possible to our bills, because the more co-sponsors you have, the more people have its backing. And so our goal when we're lobbying is to get as many co-sponsors from committees of jurisdiction, which David talked about earlier, to co-sponsor our bill. And some of the reasons we've had a more difficult time doing that some years has nothing to do with people being opposed to the bill, but historically there was an issue as to money. And what that means is that there's a certain amount of money tied to adding MFTs and LPCCs as providers. Because right now you have a situation where, especially in rural areas, where you have people in need, you have 65-year-olds who need mental health care, but there's frankly no psychologists or social workers for 50 to 100 miles. And what is being argued is, hey, if you add LPCCs and LMFTs, guess what? These people are going to get, they're going to get services, and that costs money. Historically, that was a little bit of an issue. David, do you want to quickly talk about sort of scoring of bills? Just, not to get into the weeds because it's confusing, but just a quick minute on sort of explaining how, when we go to different offices, the bills are scored and what that means.
Yes. There is a nonpartisan body or agency of the Congress which takes a look at the bills and tries to come up with what that bill is going to cost. It's called the Congressional Budget Office, or CBO. And in the past, as Cathy has alluded to, when our bill has been attached to larger bills, the latest score that we had was that it would cost $100 million over 5 years or $400 million over 10 years. And that's what's known as the CBO score. And that has been the really only roadblock over the past number of years for it to be passed, because a number of members, particularly on the Republican side, have been concerned about the cost of the bill.
And what's interesting, as I said, historically this has been an issue, but more recently what I think we're finding is members of Congress in both houses are starting to understand that the issue of preventative care, meaning, yes, it's going to, you are going to increase your costs some if you actually do have these providers seeing people with therapeutic needs or substance abuse, things of that nature. However, it will even out and or save money because you will not be instead treating these people in crisis care or in the hospitals or in the psychiatric unit. So I think that we've made some pretty good traction on convincing most Congress folks that the money's not the issue. So to me, and David, feel free to add, to me the issue at this point is just simply getting as many co-sponsors as possible, and just frankly timing, meaning timing, getting into the right bill at the right time versus anything that has to do with our arguments. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I agree with that completely.
Okay. All right. So the ask when we're lobbying, and we're going to talk more about the lobby day, but the ask while we're there in each office is for them to co-sponsor CAMFT's legislation, to co-sponsor the Senate bill or the House bill adding LMFTs to be Medicare providers. Okay, so I wanted to kind of go over what it looks like to lobby, what it's going to, what it entails, things of that nature. I'm going to kind of start, David, and then I'll have you add on. So the first day of lobbying, we're going to have, what's going to happen is we're all going to meet and we're going to have training in the morning. Now, about half the people, if not 3/4 of the people there have lobbied before. So they're very experienced. We're going to talk about substantive information. So you have the substance, sort of understanding how the day works, what your group will look like. You're going to do a lot of training, basically everything you need to know to make you comfortable. You're then going to lobby the second half of that first day, and you'll go straight into lobbying the second day as well. So you have 2 days of lobbying. And at the end of the second day, we'll have a debriefing to talk about how it went, what your thoughts were, write thank you cards, things of that nature. Something I want to say is that, for those of you who this is your first time, before you lobby, it is a little bit nerve-wracking. It's something new. And different, and you see in the movies sort of what you think it will be like. I'll be honest, every person I've ever talked to, myself included, the first office you go to, your first time lobbying, it is nerve-wracking. Once you've done it once, it's old hat. You will enjoy it. It's fun. It's interesting. Sometimes it can be frustrating, but you will not be nervous on any level. David, did you just kind of want to talk about the training and what the lobbying looks like and things of that nature?
Yes, and again, as Cathy mentioned, we have a group which will have been here before in Washington, so they have some experience, and then we'll have a group that will be coming in who have not been here. And we really rely on both groups because, for instance, it's great to have experience, but it's also great to have somebody with maybe a new and different perspective. So both groups should feel confident during the training. And what we're going to do is we're going to explain to you really the role of congressional staff in the process and how you should deal with the staff and what is the key information that you should impart to the staff members during the meeting, and then what you want to ask the staff member to do for you. So that's going to be a large part of our discussion on the training. The other part of the discussion is going to be what's happening in Congress exactly on the days that we are meeting. And in these times, the mood in Congress and the atmosphere prevailing on the Hill can change overnight. So it's important that we have some time spent in discussing what is happening up on the Hill right now. To give you an example of what I'm saying is, if we were going to have a discussion about a lobby day, say back in 2014 or 15, we would have to spend a lot of time on trying to educate the staff and the members and senators on the need for mental health services. That situation has significantly changed in the past number of years. Right now, there is a great agreement, there's a great recognition, and there's a much better understanding on the part of the members of the House, the senators, and their staffs, not only for the need for mental health services, but also the benefit of mental health services, not only to the individual patient, but also to the family members of that patient and to the overall financial health of our system nationwide. And that was a point that Cathy had touched upon before about the savings that can be achieved when we are dealing with a mentally healthier population.
And David, did you want to talk about the actual training? I mean, are you going to be doing role playing, or are you still developing it, or what should they be expecting in the actual training?
Well, I think that right now what they should expect is certainly me giving them some background onto what the prevailing mood on the Capitol is on the particular days that we'll be there. The points that I enunciated about the role of staff. We'd like to have possible presentations by staff of the individual congressional offices, just so you can get a chance, first of all, to meet a staff person if you haven't done this before, and second of all, to get their perspective as a staff person as to what they expect from a visit from a constituent. And we may do some different things. We may have someone in from our coalition partners, maybe to give a little insight into what their viewpoint is. So the training is going to specifically cover the issues of the role of legislative staff, the political atmosphere of the day, and then some other possible variations from what we've done in the past.
Okay, thank you. So what I kind of wanted to go over was sort of the logistics. For those who this is your first time, I think half of your anxiety probably rests there. As far as travel goes, if you have not bought your tickets, please do so as quickly as possible. Travel to Washington is extremely expensive, especially at this time of year. CAMFT will provide reimbursement forms. Obviously, we ask that you get the cheapest fare that's efficient, meaning, we don't expect you to make a bunch of connections or anything, but, the sooner you can get it, the better. CAMFT pays for the hotel, food, mileage, airline, parking, things of that nature. The night you arrive, we'll have a group dinner, and that's a great way to get to know everybody. Like we talked about, the first day we'll have training. Each morning you're going to have breakfast on your own, meaning at the hotel or wherever you see fit, and you'll just turn in your reimbursements. The lunches and dinners will be picked up by CAMFT. And so we'll take care of the food. Time frame, we ask that people get there by 6 p.m. the night before. Again, dinner will be hosted by CAMFT. And while you can certainly leave at the end of the second day of lobbying, we ask that you not leave the hotel, the debriefing, before 6 p.m. So if you can make a flight back to California, great. But most of us end up going to a big dinner that night and celebrating and fly out the next morning or things of that nature. What to bring? We would ask that you wear business attire. It doesn't need to be a suit, but it could be, slacks, sweater sets, things of that nature. You can wear a suit. Depending on the weather, which we don't know yet, you may want to be having a suit because it can be really hot or really cold. So you definitely want to check the weather. I recommend wearing comfortable shoes. You'll be doing a ton of walking around the Capitol. Bring your business cards. Make sure to have business cards. Each office will ask for them, so make sure to have a handful. As an aside, I just kind of wanted to reinforce, going back, that the day of lobbying, you'll be in groups, like David mentioned. So it won't be you and someone else who's never been there. You're going to either be with a staff member or David, a group that knows what they're doing, what the ask is, and you'll really fall into a rhythm with your group, and everyone kind of knows, okay, you're the opener and you tell the funny joke and you have the great example and I'm always the closer, or whatever the rhythm is you end up with your group. But it's a lot of fun. You'll be very comfortable, I guarantee it. And you know, obviously reach out to me with any questions about the logistics. Homework, what we ask before we go out to Washington, D.C., we'll be shortly sending you some information on Medicare, about, you know, how lobby visits go, what it looks like, what the ask is, sort of some examples of a conversation, the substantive part of Medicare. We ask that you take a look at that. We also ask that you talk to your colleagues. Talk to your colleagues about, you know, those that work with population 65 and older, or those that work with disabilities. Do they have stories about seeing a patient who's 64 and they turn 65 and suddenly they can't see him and they have to give him a referral for 75 miles away? Things of that nature. And then follow up short term. When we get back to California, sometimes there's action right away. Certainly we want to get back with them. Any questions they might ask, we would want to get back. Any questions they have, we want to get them answers. David will usually help with that. Possibly offices to visit their offices locally. Long-term meetings with the representative, your representative or senator on this bill, or potentially a version, if we don't get into a bigger package this year, then we would reintroduce one next year. So meeting with your senator and your representative to again ask, hey, we've got this new bill, we want you to sponsor, possibly connect your representatives with your chapters, and go to Washington next year if we have to introduce another bill and your representative is still on a committee of jurisdiction. So that's kind of the follow-up. And I hope we've sort of reviewed most of the questions you have. Certainly, like I said, you know, any questions you may have, here's my email. Feel free to email me and I'll try to answer any questions you have. A lot will be the day of, a lot will be in the materials we'll be sending soon. But it's fun, it's educational, and frankly, I just really want to thank each and every one of you for dedicating yourself to your profession, to mental health care, to CAMFT, and taking your time and energy to lobby this important issue. So I do want to say thank you. David, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yes, there is just one thing, and I just want to really emphasize a point that you made, Cathy, and it's this. And let me put a personal spin on it. I'm up on the Capitol, you know, a significant part of each week. I'm involved in this particular issue of Medicare almost all week, and it lately has been even greater. But the key, and what I have learned over the past couple of years, and what has benefited me as your federal lobbyist, is when you come to town and you can relate stories of your practice, or maybe your colleagues' practice, or those examples that have come up to you as to why we need this legislation. That is of great value, not only to me, but to the members of the staff that you're going to meet. They're going to find out how this legislation would benefit the folks back home. I mean, an example that pops into my mind is the fact that we have this phenomena in some parts of California where, because of a variety of reasons, we have members of the Hispanic community where the grandparents are raising the grandchildren. And what that effect has upon the family, has upon the Medicare recipients. You know, stories like that, stories like a member of CAMFT who has to find counseling services for the Medicare population, and there's just no one there to do it because, as Cathy said, there may be no mental health provider who's approved right now for Medicare in their particular locale. So really, if you can think about personal anecdotes, personal experiences, problems you're dealing with daily on the ground, and you can impart them to the staff, That's terrific. And again, the other part, don't be nervous. Cathy and I will be with you.
Thank you, David, and thank you for all those words. And again, thank you everyone for everything you're contributing, and please contact me with any questions.